Its ramifications for the film become clear a few minutes later when we cut away from Mikey and Nicky for the first time and we see Ned Beatty. And Ned Beatty's on the phone, and it turns out that he's organizing the hit. And we see one of these one-ended Hollywood telephone conversations, and he's organizing this hit. And then we cut to Mikey. And we see that Mikey's letting this guy, Kinney, or sometimes known as Warren, know where Nicky is so he can come and ice him. So this is about 20 minutes in, and by this point, it's clear. Now, throughout the film, up to this point, the suspicion's been there in part because Nicky has a suspicion. So, for example, when they finally decide to leave the hotel room, before they get to that bar where the phone call's made, what does Nicky do?
First. Wait a minute. What's the matter? Will you wear my jacket?
Huh?
Will you wear my jacket?
What do you think, I'm fingering you?
No, but you don't believe there's anyone out there. I do. So, if I'm right, why won't you wear my jacket?
Give it to me. Here you are.
Here you are.
Yeah, he makes him change clothes so that it's dark outside. If there is someone coming to show him, you know, even if he doesn't completely confuse Mikey and Nicky, and the names are confusing intentionally as well, even if he doesn't confuse them, he'll have second thoughts for a moment, which might be just enough time for Nicky to get away. There's also something in there, we could talk about how the two of them are wearing each other's skin. There's something important about the watch. There's a lot going on in that trading of clothes. But key to the plot is that from the very beginning, Nicky suspects that his friend is setting him up. One of the joys of watching the film is watching how these two performers do this dance when Cassavetes plays Nicky as willing to go along with this night, wanting so badly to trust Mikey, and when we see clearly that he's suspicious, that he knows something's going on. Likewise with Falk playing Mikey as someone who once really cared about Nicky and maybe still does, but at the same time knows that even if he doesn't want to help ice his best friend, if he doesn't, he and his family are in for it. So it has to be done, right? And so this cold calculation versus, you know, a lifetime of emotional connection. And the two men modulate these performances, these behaviors, these feelings magnificently. And it helps that they have worked together a lot. John Cassavetes, as you may or may not know, is one of the great independent filmmakers in American history, and he often cast Peter Falk in his films, and in some of those films played with him, acted with him. So these guys knew each other. It was Peter Falk's idea to get Cassavetes in the film. And one of the great things about the film and about May's direction of the film is that a lot of it is improvisation. So Elaine May wrote the script. Elaine May came up with the idea, and it's this brilliant idea, but she was very open to the process, or to the practice, let's say, of improvisation on the part of these two guys. And it got her in trouble a lot. And I'd like to talk just a second about the production, because interestingly, for a film that's about toxic masculinity, it's also a great example of how Hollywood treats kind of genius women. Elaine May had two hits at this point, A New Leaf, which was also taken away from her in the editing, and The Heartbreak Kid. And these weren't like explosive Godfather, Jaws, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest level hits, but they were well-respected films. And now she gets the chance to make Mikey and Nicky. She's going to make it at Fox, but then it falls through, so she's going to make it at Paramount. And they're giving her quite a bit of leeway. She's like, I want to shoot it in Philadelphia. I'm going to shoot the whole thing at night. We're not doing day for night. We're shooting the whole thing at night. And it's going to be the story of these two guys' relationship falling apart. And Paramount's like, let's do it, Elaine. And then May really gets into the making of this film. She sees that she has these two performers who are embodying these roles. So she lets them go. And the film's famous for having shot over 1 million feet of film. It's one of the longest in terms of films made in Hollywood history. And a lot of that is because she often had 3 cameras on them, so she could get them from different angles. And she would just load the cameras. You've got about 10 minutes of film, and she would just point all 3 and let them go until the film ran out. And there are stories of Cassavetes going like, he was a director, and he'd be like, we've been going for more than 10 minutes, and May going, keep going, keep going. We might get something we can use. She was fastidious about some things, like there's a really famous cemetery scene in the film, which I'll come back to in a minute. And they shot the whole night in this cemetery, and then they noticed that there are crickets. And Elaine May says, I don't want the crickets there. We have to find another cemetery and shoot it again. So the next night they go to another cemetery, they shoot it again, and of course there are crickets. And in the scene, as it is on the DVD, you can hear the crickets.
Give me your lighter. I want to see the names on those headstones over there. Watch it. It's a grave. Excuse me. Grave. Let me see this. Where are you? Here.
Victor Kemper, the cinematographer, got fed up with this and at one point quit the film. And there's a funny story. There's a great scene late in the film when Ned Beatty and Peter Falk think they're catching Nicky, John Cassavetes, and they're chasing him down. And it looks like this.
Let me out of the car.
Beautifully lit, and I love the way it appears that the lights are only coming from the headlights of the car. After Kemper quit, they were scheduled to shoot that film, and Cassavetes, a filmmaker, but a low-budget indie filmmaker, said, I can shoot that scene, Elaine, it's no problem. All we need are the headlights from the car. And so she's like, are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. So they shot it. And when they got to look at the dailies, the film was black. So Cassavetes was like, well, maybe we need brighter lights, or we need to turn the high beams on. I don't know all the details. But they went out and tried it again. And they looked at the dailies again, and it's black. And so Elaine called Victor Kemper and said, hey, could you at least come and look at this and tell me what we're doing wrong? And he came down and he looked at it, and they shone a light through it. And he could just see, he says he could just see a pinprick of light. And she's like, can you fix this? He's like, will you let me light it how I want to light it? And can we get this done in one night? And she's like, yes, I promise. And he came back on the film, and we get that scene, which is lit and shot magnificently. It looks great. But the interesting thing is that this behavior in the middle of the 1970s was de rigueur amongst these mavericks of New Hollywood. And you hear story after story of Altman, of Paul Schrader, of Steven Spielberg on Jaws, of Coppola. I mean, my God, we're just a couple years away from Apocalypse Now, and of course, by the end of the decade, Cimino's Heaven's Gate. But over and over, even someone like Ashby would often run over time or shoot more film than was intentional. Ashby famously shot thousands and thousands and thousands of feet because he knew he was going to stitch together a performance in the editing room. And all of these men were given leeway to do this. If you read about the New Hollywood era, one of the things you read is that it's an era of mavericks. So imagine this scene, right? They're shooting a scene in Mikey and Nicky, and it's outdoors, and Falk and Cassavetes are walking down a dark street, and the camera's following them, and they turn down an alley. Now, the alley hadn't been part of the scene. The alley wasn't blocked, the alley wasn't lit, but they turned down the scene, but the camera crew can't follow them. So one of the camera assistants yells, cut, right? And Elaine May gets furious. First of all, if this was an Altman film, if this was a Schrader film or a Spielberg film, no camera assistant would ever yell cut on a Robert Altman film. But he felt like that was okay to do on an Elaine May film. That's toxic masculinity right there. And so May gets pissed off, as she should. She's the director of the film. And she says, "What are you yelling cut for? I yell cut. Nobody else yells cut. I'm the director." And the guy's like, "But they left the set." And she's like, "I might come back." That's a great story, but oftentimes when that story is told to describe them making this film, it's told in such a way to illustrate what a loon Elaine May was, what a buffoon, what an inexperienced, non-practiced director she was. Imagine that same story if Altman's directing. It becomes a moment of genius, and he's like, "I don't care, what if they come back on?" You know, and maybe they do, and maybe you get one of those great Altman moments where the camera drifts away from the performers and we don't see them, and then they come back on. Altman's films are full of moments like that. And when Altman does it, it's genius. When Elaine May does it, she doesn't get to make another film for 10 years. So you can see why she might be invested in exploring the twisted side of these guys' psyche. It's a beautifully made film. The cinematography is fantastic. It's dark, it's rain-drenched, but you also get beautifully lit moments like this when we just get this still shot outside the bar where they're first waiting for Ned Beatty to show up and take Nicky out. I just love how beautifully colorful that is, but also how sort of gritty and sad it is at the same time. And the film's full of moments like that. And some of them come in a scene that's really, I think, one of the best scenes in the film, but also despicable and really hard to watch. And that's when Nicky decides to take Mikey to see his girlfriend. And he has set the scene that this woman he's taking Mikey to see is a prostitute. And they're both gonna sort of get their jollies before Nicky leaves town. And Mikey's like, okay, now we already know that Mikey's married. We've seen him talking on the phone to his wife. He lives in sort of suburbia. He's got a kid that needs to be put to bed, but you know, it's toxic masculinity. So he goes with Nicky to this woman's house, and just the staging and the blocking here, the way actors are moved in this very colorful space where you get the feeling of the darkness of night outside is brilliantly done. And then what happens is just one of the sort of most brutal scenes I've seen in a film. And there's nothing incredibly violent that you're about to see, but it's just so sort of derogatory and mean and gross. And what happens is Nicky and Nellie, who's played amazingly by Carol Grace, have sex on the floor while Mikey sits in the kitchen and basically kind of watches, right? Looks like that. And then they keep their clothes on. And you get this very uncomfortable, cringy sex scene. And then Nicky gets up and goes over to Mikey, and then this happens.
Boy. So you like the news, huh?
I like to know what's happening.
You know, that's unusual. Because you know that most pretty girls They don't have a brain in their head. I mean, most pretty girls, they don't care about anything that's happening around them, except that they want to have a good time. Isn't it so?
Yes, I guess most girls are pretty dumb.
It makes it nice when they're smart and pretty.
Thank you. Mikey. Please. Mikey, please. Don't get fresh.
I just want a little kiss.
Mikey, please. Mikey. Mikey, please. Get out of here! Get out! Get your coat! Get out!
Hey! What's going on here? Hey, what's going on? Hey,
Bitch, I wanna crack your face in.
what'd she
Get
do?
out of here!
She bit your lip?
Oh, get out of here!
Give this man a handkerchief. His lip is bleeding.
Get out of here! Get out of here!
Hey, now look, a lot of the boys said you were a nice girl. Now that's not very nice, Nellie.
What we find out later in the film, in another brutal scene after Mikey and Nicky have split up and Nicky's really on the ropes now and he comes back to Ellie's place, is that she's not a call girl, she's not a prostitute, and that Nicky has been encouraging his friends to try to sleep with her. He's been telling them all that she's a call girl, to get them to try to sleep with her in a sort of twisted test to see how she'll respond. And it's just the sort of most horrifically misogynist and brutal behavior. And this is the Nicky that the film at the same time is asking us to care about. And this is where the film, you know, is a lot deeper and more complicated and I think kind of harder to watch than it appears on its surface. And we get a lot of scenes with Nicky like this. There's another moment earlier in the film when they've left the first bar and they need to make a phone call and they go into another bar that is predominantly African American. And while Mikey goes to make his phone call, we get this scene with Nicky.
You want gin and tonic, right? I have gin. Gin.
Hey,
Hi, how are you?
Mel, this is, wow, what is your name?
Is your name Mel? My name is Mel. What's your last name?
He gave me a dime. I was gonna make a call. His friend is in the booth. He gave me a dime, and he bought me a drink.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hello. You gave her a dime, right? Yeah. So I owe you a dime because this is my old lady. Okay?
What do you mean, she's your old lady? She's not old.
Bye.
That old black man.
Man, I'm trying to give you a break.
Will you listen to me? Look in the phone booth. Look in the phone booth. Look in the phone booth. Just turn around. Now, everybody in here knows you the man, so why don't you leave? I mean, we might be black, but we ain't dumb.
Well, how come you're black?
Mel.
What did you say?
This is Nicky. He's abusing his privilege dramatically here. I mean, if that bar wanted to, Mikey and Nicky would be done for. But they believe, as you can see from the scene, that these guys are cops. So there's the privilege of being the white men alone, but there's also the veneer of the potential that these guys are cops. So that's the only thing protecting Nicky. But he knows it, and he uses that to just, for no reason except to like throw his nasty racist weight around to make these epithets, to cause these problems. This is the toxicity that Elaine May is interested in. And when you get a film like this, you know, this is a film where normally in Hollywood, we would want to root for Nicky. Nicky's the guy who the film opens with. He's got a hit out on his head, and we're supposed to, in sort of typical Hollywood style, root for this guy. So part of you as a viewer is rooting for him because that's the way movies work, right? You're supposed to cheer for the main character. But the main character is a scumbag. He is despicable. He's turned on his friends. We see him with his wife later, his ex-wife, the mother of his child. He's a horrible husband. He's a horrible boyfriend. He turned on the guys in the mob. He's just a despicable human being. How are we supposed to root for him? How are we supposed to give a tiny rat's ass about this guy and whether he survives the night or not? And at the same time, his best friend is orchestrating his murder. How are we supposed to care about him? Part of it's because these performances are magnetic. We love watching Cassavetes and Falk riff off each other, push each other, prod each other, fight with each other, embrace each other, piss each other off. They're constantly needling each other, getting underneath each other's skin. And that's the joy in this film, and it's a very complex equation because it's an amazing film to watch, and it's an amazing film to experience because it's so laden with complex emotions, and it's so laden with the potential for contradictory impulses on our part as viewers. We want Cassavetes to survive. It's John frickin' Cassavetes, man. Do we want Nicky to survive? Can we find that grain in there when he's at his mother's grave and he's, talking about his childhood and he and Mikey? Are we supposed to care about Mikey and his watch? And Falk has this great scene near the end of the film when he's returned home and he's with his wife and he's talking about Nicky and his little brother, who I mentioned earlier, who died as a boy, and his father. And it's a beautiful scene, and Falk performs it wonderfully, and the potential for Nicky to die is taking place very nearby. I don't want to tell you what happens, but so you're watching this and you're like, oh, Mikey, oh man, you're a scumbag. And that's the real power of this film, is that it really plays around with your instincts as a viewer, and it really pushes you to make decisions or to forego decisions just so you can get to the end of the film about how you feel about these guys. There's so much more to say about this film. Every scene is so rich, the way that it's shot, the way it's cut, and certainly the way that it's performed. These two men really commit to this film, and I think that's something that's really important to think about, because when two performers, especially two performers of the caliber of Cassavetes, who's not just a great Hollywood performer from The Dirty Dozen or Rosemary's Baby or whatever it might be, but one of the preeminent kind of important, if small, film directors working at the time. He's just made A Woman Under the Influence. And then there's Peter Falk, who's Columbo, if anything else. And that these two guys go into this relationship with their director and put this much of themselves into the roles, but also put this much trust into May's direction, is, I think, a really important thing to consider when you're watching this film, because a lot of May's reputation, as I've said, was dented by her supposed eccentricity, but a lot of what makes this film work is that these two performers are willing to go where they go in this film, and you don't do that no matter how seasoned you are if you don't trust and respect your director. So there might have been other people on the crew, that assistant cameraman, even Victor Kemper at some points, who didn't respect May. But certainly Cassavetes and Falk do, and you can see that in their performance and their commitment to these roles. And it's just fascinating to watch. And it's really a film you have to see. It's not just one of the best crime films of the 70s, or let's say an anti-crime film, because in a way it kind of is an anti-crime film. I mean, it's an examination of where one can go, right, with this kind of socialization, with this kind of normalization. Living your life thinking that the only thing that matters is that you get what you want when you want it, and that if anybody else stops you, disrespects you, makes fun of you, or challenges your, however precarious your position on the ladder of privilege, that you are within your rights to hurt, harm, do violence to that person, whether psychological in some cases or physical in many of the cases. That's not a life to live. Well, that's the life these guys live. And I think in the end, that's what gives the film a lot of its weight, is that we don't sympathize with Nicky because he's the hero of the film. We sympathize with him because, man, it sucks to be you. Not just because you got a hit out on your head. It sucks to be Mikey. It sucks to be men who are driven to, and then at some point choose to live their lives in toxic violence. And the film prods that and picks at that and unpacks that better than most Hollywood films I've ever seen. And that's what makes it, as I was about to say, not just one of the best crime films or anti-crime films of the decade, but if you're into that strain of 70s Hollywood cinema, you know, and not all Hollywood 70s cinema is like this. You know, there's musicals, there's cartoons, and so on. But that strain that has defined a lot of the great cinema of the 70s, of the darkness, the twisted cynicism. This is one of the best films of the decade. I mean, this film should be revered for how dark and twisted and complex, and in the end, in a troubling but also kind of moving way, compassionate, this film is. It's not just great. It's nothing short of incredible. That's all for now, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Not just this. If you're still here after this take on the film, I really appreciate your sort of allegiance to this channel. I want to do something a little different, dig a little bit deeper with this film. It's one of my favorite movies ever. And, you know, to give it a little bit more of a sort of, you know, picking apart than I do sometimes. So I appreciate it if you're still here. If you are, please like, subscribe to the channel if you would. Share the channel with other people that you know who are into film and who are into kind of these deep dives that I do here. If you're watching this in mid-December of 2021, happy holidays, however you celebrate them, or happy just having ended Hanukkah if you celebrated that. It's been a tough year. It's been a tough couple of years, you know, and one of the things we can do is indulge our passions and share them with each other. And I love movies. I love watching them. I love talking about them. And I love sharing my thoughts about them with you. And, you know, find what you love. That can be hard to do, but, you know, we got another long haul with COVID, whatever your take on it is. We've got another long haul. So I'm off to get my third booster shot, and that's going to be fun right around Christmas. But that's not going to be the end of it for any of us. So find what you love, celebrate it, share it, give it to other people. Try to create a little light in these dark times. Yeah. Happy holidays, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. My name's Aaron Hunter. Keep watching movies.